Most people flick without looking. What that causes is a discorrelation between the initial flick and the micro. So essentially most people flick, they're in complete darkness, and then they wake up and now they micro. It's blurry in the initial flick, they wake up and then they micro. So essentially they're just flicking to reach anywhere near the target, and then they decide what to go. And that creates a discorrelation between the two and can have number one, you're not looking before you're moving your mouse. So before any mouse movement happens, you're not looking where to go. It's similar to if you're turning a corner on a car, you have to look at the corner you want to drive to, right? Your eyes lead you to where to go. So either while you're flicking your mouse, you should look at him, or before you even move your mouse is ideal. You want to avoid this. You're not focusing on anything, you're just moving your mouse and now you're focusing on something, right? You want to avoid that. Because what ends up happening is that you're snapping or overflicking all the time. And when you're snapping and overflicking all the time, what happens in game, right, is that you're also going to be snapping and overflicking. And if you're adding movement into the whole bunch, you can see how that really complicates things. So essentially, what I want you to do is to focus on looking at the target and also under flicking rather than over flicking. You should also focus on having some slight decelerations to your flicks. So you're not just snapping super hard, stopping super hard, and then adjusting. So you should have almost constant movement, as they call it, instead of having an abrupt halt and then a flick, abrupt halt and then a flick, which is really, really detrimental, because in game, if you have an abrupt halt, the person is going to have moved far away and you have to, adjust really, really quickly if even that's possible. So when we're talking about this, we're also diving into speed, because some people will then move super slow. And if it's all a little bit too confusing, don't worry, try to take one thing at a time. So if you have huge issues with looking at the target, take some time and purely focus on that, because we need to move fast in game, right? These people usually misunderstand what speed is. Speed is not moving your hand super fast. That's going to cause a bunch of misses, right? Speed is minimal wasted movements. And what does a wasted movement look like? Boom. Why? Because now we have to add another extra movement on top of that. And when that extra movement, that micro, is slower than your initial flick, that causes extra wasted movement. So I'll show you this picture, essentially what describes it. So the ideal flick looks like this: 100 millisecond initial and 100 millisecond micro, which causes 200 milliseconds. You can also see he's under flicking rather than over flicking, and he's also slowly decelerating here with the red part. So instead of snapping super hard, this person chooses to move a little slower, but is still faster than this person. Why? Because this person's initial is super hard. And what happens when you have a super hard initial is that that's usually where you end up shooting as well. In game, this is where your shot will land, because your initial flick is too fast and your micro is too slow. Since your micro is now 300 milliseconds, you will have moved faster, but technically slower than this person. So it's not in the hand speed, I'm moving really, really fast here. It's in the wasted movements that I'm creating. So in Kovaaks, we want to essentially build really good habits, and minimalizing your wasted movements is a huge habit I want you to keep in mind. I can move really fast, but I'll be slower than somebody who's moving a little bit, slower, but more at a consistent pace. Because again, if we're adding movement to the whole mix, what happens is that we're flicking super hard and the person has moved. So if we're flicking super hard and then the person has moved, to recalculate his new position, essentially. That can really be detrimental if you already have a slow micro. So what happens to a person who will say, well, I'm moving really slow, I'm doing everything properly, but I'm still overflicking in game despite not overflicking in Kovaaks? And that is an excellent question. So there could be a million different possibilities for this person. For example, this person may just need pokeball. Okay, that might be as simple as it is. But usually what ends up happening is that this person is actually not target reading in dynamic. What target reading essentially is that you don't want to flick to the person's old position, so you have to adjust. You want to flick to his new position or where he will be. So how an improper flick would look like would be a flick to his old position and then adjusting, flick to his old position and then adjusting. How target reading would look like is essentially this. I know he will be here in the next millisecond, so I won't flick to his old position so I don't have to adjust. I'll flick to where he will be in the next frame. Why? Because now I'm reading where he will be and I'll be flicking to his new position rather than his old one, which then causes a micro. And in game, and it would essentially look like this. Instead of doing this hard flick and then adjusting, you would flick to where he will be. And you could see a very detrimental example of that happening in one of my students. If you take a look here, notice where his first flick is. He flicks to his old position and then that causes him to overly miss. So similar to that guy, what's happening is he's flicking to the old position, updating, old position, updating. And what did we learn? Because we have this hard initial, we now have to have a prolonged micro. And that means you have to overly rely on your tracking skills, which most attack FPS players don't have. Usually in game, that causes you to overly rely on where your initial shot lands instead of microing because the person's moving, your micro is too slow, etc., etc. So that was essentially a little bit of speed management, but what if you already know that and you're still already missing? A huge thing is missing when speed is being applied. Because if you're overflicking like this guy, when speed or pressure or anything like that is being applied, you probably will overflick in target switching as well. If you're overflicking in these very large scenarios where you're doing this all the time, and you're moving super fast, what usually ends up happening is that you'll do the exact same habit in Kovaaks, because as we learned, Kovaaks is a habit builder just as much as it is a skill builder. So this person who constantly overflicks on larger scenarios, he needs to play and get comfortable with that speed. If you're inaccurate moving fast in Kovaaks, you'll also be inaccurate when you need to move fast in game. So essentially what ends up happening is that you're not comfortable moving fast because you have only practiced how to be accurate and not how to be accurate while moving fast. And that's exactly what easier scenarios give you some room to work with. Usually these people will have a natural inclination towards speed. Because if you struggle to hit this guy fast and clean, how do you think you should hit in-game target that's way smaller, fast and clean, right? Target switching essentially relies for your raw intuition, your raw input, just your reaction to seeing someone. And if you're inaccurate to a large target, you're going to be inaccurate to a small one. And that's really where habit and not skill comes into play. So if you're constantly overflicking, what's going to happen when you go into game? You're going to constantly be overflicking because that's what you're showing your brain to do. So that doesn't mean you need to be moving very slow. It means that you need to identify what you're struggling with. If you're overflicking on these larger targets, chances are that's exactly what you need to, that's the hump that you need to get over right now. It's not these super accurate or super hard scenarios. And scores may take a hit short term by moving a little bit more properly, moving with decelerations, focusing on stuff like that. But in the long run, you will see good results in game. Which brings me into my fourth point, intuition aiming. Essentially, it's relying on no technique, no thought. It's just raw. Hey, shit, I see an enemy, I'm flicking. I see an enemy, I'm flicking. And it's obviously I'm exaggerating here, but it's just moving your mouse as fast as possible and trying to hit targets, right? If a person like me, for example, has 60%, 80% very low accuracy when hitting these larger targets, he needs to play more of this because essentially his intuition aiming is off. But in game, what will matter isn't the score you take with, it's the habits you form. Your enemy won't care what your Kovaaks score is. The only thing that matters is who can reach who faster. And sometimes to be faster means to optimize your lines. Again, wasting less movement, and lowering your TTK. Because if you form good habits, you'll reach your enemy before he reaches you. But in Kovaaks, you're not punished for bad habits, nor are you punished for overly taking your time or overly rushing. In short, if you're missing in these, you need to play more of these and get that skill up. Because if you can't consistently hit a larger target fast, how do you then expect to hit a smaller target like this one fast? What ends up happening is that then intuition aiming will be super relevant. So this leads into dynamic. Why? Because a lot of people play overly difficult dynamic where they're flicking super hard, they're not target reading, similar to the other one, and then they're adjusting really slowly. They're adjusting really slowly. What happens if you do that in game? These guys moving very slow. I'm flicking and then I have to adjust. Oh shit, he's moved. I'm flicking, I have to adjust. And in game, we don't have that time. So what do? Well, we actually play larger dynamic clicking. Because if you can't hit this target quickly and fast, similar to the other one, similar to static, you cannot hit in-game target that's much smaller fast. So what did we learn by all of this? A huge thing is to focus on habit, not skill. If we're constantly overflicking, we're going to do the same in game. So focus on those decelerations, focus on underflicking rather than overflicking, and looking at the target. And that should transfer into game because your habits transfer into game much as well as your skill. So that also brings me to my last and final point, which is to confirm before clicking. And essentially what that does, confirming before clicking, is sort of meant to snap you out of autopilot mode. Instead of you just flicking and spamming and being a little crazy with it, I want to always keep you awake, keep you alert of, hey, I'm not in the middle of the target. Now I'm in the middle of the target. And that causes you to have a focus on these minuscule changes in direction, and usually is great for people who have natural speed but struggle with accuracy. And I also want to cover a final point, which is to watch pro VODs and put them up next to your VOD, which you'll be able to tell, holy shit, he's microing faster than me, I'm microing slow, I'm adjusting too fast here, I'm doing this, I'm snapping, etc. And you can really see the difference. If you like the way you think, I want to tell you that my coaching is open, but it won't always be open. So if you're interested, I do strongly recommend you sign up now when you can.